In our book, Pressing Israel, Media Bias Exposed from A to Z, which is also on this website, Facts of Israel, we end with our concluding chapter, The Media War. Can Israel get fair coverage? Well, let me start first with a little story. An Israeli in Paris saw a pit bull attacking a toddler. He killed the pit bull and saved the child's life. Reporters swarmed the fellow. "Tell us, what's your name? All Paris will love you." Tomorrow's headline will be, quote, "Hero saves girl from vicious dog." The guy says, "Well, but I'm not from Paris." So the reporter says, "Well, that's okay. Then the whole of France will love you, and tomorrow's headline will read, Hero saves girl from vicious dog." The guy says, "But I'm not from France either." The reporter says, "All right, all of Europe will love you. Tomorrow's headlines will shout, Hero saves girl from vicious dog." The man says, "I'm not from Europe either." "So where are you?" says the reporter. "Well, I'm from Israel," he says. "Okay, then, the headline's going to read, Israeli kills girl's dog." Now, that is exactly what goes on in the way Israel is reported, and why the story gets wrongly reported so often. A former longtime AP reporter named Maddie Friedman, in August of 2014, wrote an insider's guide to the most important story on earth. He explained how and why reporters get Israel so wrong and why it matters. He basically broke the taboo on explaining how the narrative has been distorted against Israel. As he says here, there's been so much discussion recently of Hamas attempts to intimidate reporters. Any veteran of the press corps here knows the intimidation is real, and I saw it in action myself as an editor on the AP news desk. During the 2008-2009 Gaza fighting, and I can also say this applies to the 2014 war as well, I personally erased a key detail that Hamas fighters were dressed as civilians and being counted as civilians in the death toll because of a threat to our reporter in Gaza. As we state here, and our observation, the policy was then and remains not to inform readers that the story is censored unless the censorship is Israeli. Earlier this month, the AP's Jerusalem news editor reported and submitted a story on Hamas intimidation. The story was shunted into the deep freeze by its superiors and has not been published. Maddie Friedman goes on, "The fact is that Hamas intimidation is largely beside the point because the actions of Palestinians are beside the point. Most reporters in Gaza believe their job is to document violence directed by Israel at Palestinian civilians. That is the essence of the story. Period. End of discussion." Here's how the United States administration's quote-unquote honest broker looks to us. You have John Kerry in the middle on the table with the Hamas guy and Bibi. And the Hamas guy is very clear. He's holding, look at him. He's holding a child, so-called a child with a suicide vest on, and his demands are very clear. Death to all Jews. And what does the honest broker from the United States, Bibi, tell Bibi? Could you at least meet him halfway? You defeat your enemies. You can't make peace with evil. Here's a nice little chart that I think shows very well how the media's Israel coverage looks to us. News of the Middle East. If Muslims are getting killed, the question first would be, is Israel involved? And if the answer is yes, then we want to know how many casualties. And if it's under 1,000, well, stop these war crimes. Or if it's over 1,000, oh my God, we must stop the genocide. But if the answer is Israel involved in Muslims getting killed? If the answer is no, and the question is how many casualties, if it's under 100,000, well, lots of laughs, who cares, it shouldn't even be on the news. Oh, that's too bad if it's over 100,000. That's what we expect from Muslims. They're violent people, violent religion, they're killing themselves. We hold them to a lower standard. Seems that's how the media does report things, doesn't it? When you read an article, and we just have an example of a New York Times article, to understand the bias, you have to be very clear and dissect what is going on, because many times the bias is subtle and the narrative makes it seem like it makes sense, but they're missing a lot of key details, and they're putting Israel in that, with those omissions and commissions, they're putting Israel in a bad light. And here's just an example of a media jumble, as we'll call it, to uncover the way Israel is portrayed in very poor terms. Now, there's an organization called CAMRA, which is based in Boston, Committee of Accurate Middle East Reporting, and they put out what they call the top 10 media mangles. And they have a very good website, and they go in detail, and at the end of the year, they come up with the top 10. I have an example here of 2012, and we've mentioned in another video that we just did that CBS's reporting on 60 Minutes with the late Bob Simon indicted Israel for the suffering of Christians and downplayed Muslim hostility and portrayed Israel as the oppressor. But look at this. Washington Post coverage, Haaretz, of the apartheid, media misconstrues facts on the building of an Israeli area in the so-called West Bank that would not bisect the West Bank. The Guardian in the United Kingdom, very poor coverage. Spanish newspapers, NPR, these are very bad coverage of Israel. And it goes on and on. Here's 2013, the New York Times and CBS and CNN and Haaretz and UK and PBS, BBC. You could look at all these here. 2014, the hate indoctrination, the Gaza war distortions, parroting of Hamas's inflated civilian casualty coverage. Yahoo News, again, even Jon Stewart on The Daily Show, CNN, NPR, backsliding into old habits here. 2015, the list goes on and on. It keeps going. So what are some of the causes of anti-Israel media bias? Let's get right down to it. I think we can identify something I like to call underdogma, or empathy for the underdog. Now, Israel has gone from the 1948 homegrown militia fending off the invasion by 5 Arab states' armies to the post-1967 Six-Day War victory, the startup nation, the high-tech army Goliath looming over the slingshot-using Palestinians. That is what the narrative is. Poor, defenseless, victim Palestinians who are not responsible for themselves, but that Israel, this big Goliath of a country who we've discussed in other videos here, the country of 6.2 million Jews, is somehow oppressing millions of Palestinians and millions of Arabs. You have that empathy. Israel and the Jewish people coming from post-Holocaust, when they lost 6 million Jews, were decimated, we were the underdogs, the world had sympathy. But now once the tables have turned according to the media, now Israel's the oppressor, and see, the Jews are just as bad as everybody else. That is one of the causes of anti-Israel media bias. Another one, as Maddie Friedman alluded to, is Palestinian Arab intimidation of the media. Now let's understand this. Israel is a robust democracy. So robust, in fact, that its media seems like a free-for-all. Its own media. Free press, and it's like free-for-all over there in Israel. But it's open, and it's free, and it's democratic. That is not in any way, shape, or form the way the Palestinian Arabs conduct themselves or their government. Their government is not a democracy. It's authoritarian. And it's run by thuggish groups that are corrupt, like the PLO, Fatah, Palestinian Authority. They intimidate the media. It magnifies the obsessive reporting on Israel due to its robust press versus the Arab world, who is state-dominated, closed government-run free press. Not unfree press, I should say. So reporters are free to roam around Arab countries and report on what's going on. And that includes within Gaza as well. If a reporter wanted to get some information about Arabs, Palestinian Arabs, and goes into the territories, they're going to be accompanied and watched mindfully. And if they take pictures or talk to wrong people, their cameras are going to be confiscated. They are intimidated, and their lives can be intimidated. And that has happened in Gaza. And some of the other causes is that ourselves, we are averting our eyes from imbalanced reporting. And what are some of the criteria for the anti-Semitism versus anti-Zionism? Well, we need to understand that denying Jews their right to self-determination is one of those. Using symbols and images associated with historical anti-Semitism, or comparing Jews to Nazis, or accusing Jews in Israel of inventing or exaggerating the Holocaust, demonizing Israel, delegitimizing Israel, holding Israel to a double standard, promoting boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel, the BDS, which is another segment, condoning terrorism against Jews and supporting terrorist organizations, targeting Jewish students for discrimination, harassment, and intimidation. These are some of the criteria that the media do not report correctly on. And organization here is an example from Aish.com. They reviewed our book, and they put together 9 ways to bias an article against Israel. The inaccurate headlines, photographs that are inaccurate, putting any pro-Israel facts toward the end of the story, burying them, quoting Arabs without responses from Israelis, singling out Israel to an impossibly high standard, denying Israel the same rights of self-defense possessed by every other country, and unfairly equating Israel's response to terrorism to the acts of terrorism. Basically, the arsonist versus the firefighter. Demonizing and delegitimizing Israel, and using code words and biased phrases to mislead and perpetuate myths. And these are some of the examples which we've talked about in our book, and it's talked about in 10 toxic terms, but so-called suicide bombers, militants, occupied territories, retaliation, code words, millions of Palestinian refugees and their descendants, the West Bank. These are code words, examples of biased phrases used by the media against Israel. I've shown this before, the old anti-Semitism versus the new anti-Semitism, the Jews kill babies versus the Jewish state kills babies. So how can we combat this? Now, Israel's accused of having very poor public relations. And in fact, to some extent that is true. Israelis always hoped, and leaders hoped, that if the truth just came out, that the world would believe Israel's side, a small nation defending itself in a hostile sea of authoritarian, theocratic rule of its neighbors who want to destroy it. Unfortunately, the Palestinians, Arabs have had better PR and better buzzwords, and for a variety of reasons, some of which are anti-Semitic and some of which are jealousy of the Jewish state, their PR with buzzwords has gotten through, and Israel's now on the defense. What do we need to do to try to turn this around? How a small nation makes a big difference is one way. Talk about Israel as an asset and an ally of the United States with shared Judeo-Christian values. It's a democracy that respects civil rights, women's rights, human rights, has a first-class education system and health care, and an open, robust press, and a free judiciary. As Professor Alan Dershowitz has said, if you espouse these values, these are classic liberal values that only Israel respects. And Israel shares with the world. It's the startup nation. It shares with the world with humanitarianism gestures. You know, the Arabs are treated in Israel, in Israeli hospitals, just as much as the Jews are. They're given health care. They're given free health care. In fact, Israel takes in from the rest of the Arab world for free care from Gaza, from Syria, from Saudi Arabia, from Egypt. It takes children and people who cannot afford health care because of its world-class health care, because in Jewish values are for biology. I call this medical care for all. I call it biology trumps ideology. In fact, even in Israel, when there's a terrorist attack, terrorists are brought to the same hospital as the victims. And the medical personnel, even at Israeli hospitals, who are both Jews and Arab, do not discriminate. These are things that are not told about. Israel is an oasis in a hostile, totalitarian, authoritarian Islamic desert. Also, Israel believes in the Jewish values of social justice. Now, people are going to argue that the Palestinian Arabs don't have social justice, and maybe they don't have the best opportunities in some places in Israel as others. We have those same problems here in the United States. But those who are Israeli citizens, they have the same exact rights. And They go to schools, they go to some of the best universities, they get free health care, the national health care, and they have education and opportunities. Tikkun olam, which I have up here, is a famous term which is sometimes perversely used, but it means to help repair the world. And that is seen as a mission that Israel has also to help in disasters and natural disasters around the world. Israel is one of the first responders. It doesn't get credit for this in the news whatsoever. It went to Haiti several years ago for a major earthquake. Has even gone to and offered Iran when it had a major earthquake years ago, and the Iranians would not allow Israel to go in there and help, because Israel has a lot of experience doing this, help its own citizens, and rather its citizens who are languish in the ruins of the earthquakes, rather than fester and die, rather than having Israel and the Jewish people help them. Israel goes around the world and helps. So we have to be an ambassador for the truth. And I say, let my people know. Help win our future by winning back our past. And stop using these terms to denigrate Israel and the Jewish homeland connection to Israel. Again, if you forfeit the language, you forfeit our heritage and our history.